Well, I have 1 o'clock, so let's get started. This is Scott Loveridge from Michigan State University. I'm your guest moderator today, substituting for Mark Skidmore, who's the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development and an entity that is the host for these webinars. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers, Dr. Linda Neem, who's a professor at Iowa State University, Dr. Margaret Fitzgerald, who's a professor and dean at North Dakota State University, Dr. Glenn Muskie, who is with GM Consulting and formerly with North Dakota State University Extension. And I believe Dr. Yeonyu Shin contributed to the work but won't be joining us today. If you have questions as we move forward, please enter them into the chat box and we'll ask the speakers to answer them during little pauses that they make, and so we'll try to get those answered as we move along. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Neem.
Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar. Scott has already given us an introduction of our presenters. I want to especially thank Margaret and Glenn for their contributions to the webinar and to this NCRCRD grant overall. They have been wonderful co-PIs. And also to Anyu Shin for her contributions with the statistical consulting. I want to also mention that this project was done in collaboration with the NC 1030 Family Business Research Group. This is a group of researchers from approximately 12 academic institutions, primarily land-grant institutions. We study family and small businesses and also the intersection of the two. So the icons that you see at the bottom of each slide reflect the schools from team members who have contributed to this initial the initial analyses, initial look at data collection, et cetera, from the NCRCRD grant. That certainly doesn't reflect all of the schools, but some of the initial major contributors. Okay. Rural areas have endured many challenges. The recession, of course, posed additional challenges, which we'll be discussing today. Most of you likely know many of the major challenges which are shown here on the slide, such as the smaller populations, aging populations, isolation, etc. There also, though, is this trickle-down effect, which you may not necessarily think about. When you have those larger issues like the population change, such as I mentioned, you have a trickle-down effect, such as the size and type of customers that you would likely have access to, the markets you would have access to, your labor force, technology access, as well as types of business assistance. So all of those can have pose challenges for rural businesses as well. Research has also shown rural areas are often higher in poverty rates, which kind of the inverse of that, along with that would be less wealth, less education, and access to fewer government programs and services. Interestingly, also, we have found that the types and profile of entrepreneurs that you find in rural areas, which are primarily associated with family businesses, are also unique. Okay, so as we look at rural family businesses, I mean, rural businesses are by and large family businesses. They're vital to the local economy. They provide family income, sources of employment for the communities in which they are located. They benefit the community both economically as well as socially. Family and business success are also inherently linked. To be sustainable, resources from both the family and the business are necessary. And business sustainability is also influenced by family and business managerial decisions, as well as life events that intervene, and also the individual owner's perspective and how resilient they are. Okay, for this study, the overarching purpose was to examine rural family-owned businesses and their strategic and entrepreneurial responses to the 2007 to 2009 recession. You'll see in just a little bit when we go over the methods that this is really a fourth wave of our look at family businesses. And we thought that the recession really posed special and unique challenges to these rural family businesses. So we wanted to take a look at how they responded. We have a series of research questions that were posed. The first one was looking at demographic characteristics of small family-owned businesses who survived the recession. So those that are still around post-recession of 2007-2009. The second question, if a business had closed since 2007, what was the reason for closure? Thirdly, how did the recession of 2007 to 2009 influence financial performance for small family-owned firms? Okay. 4, how did the use of entrepreneurial business strategies and practices by small family-owned firms influence their ability to cope with challenges posed by the recession? And then the last several are looking at difference in business revenue for small family-owned businesses who utilized online and digital strategies versus those who didn't use such practices. In previous waves, we had some minimal questions regarding e-commerce, but they were very, very early stage questions. So now we're looking at their ability to use online and digital strategies. And in RQ6, which of these online digital strategies were most utilized by small family-owned businesses to be more competitive? Okay, and next I will turn it over to Margaret.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Sustainable family business theory was one of the frameworks that we used to guide this study. The theory is used to ascertain how the family and the business reallocate resources when a disruption occurs, such as a recession. Mary Winter was one of the founding members of the Family Business Group. She was at Iowa State, and she and her husband, Earl Morris, provided the initial conceptualization of the theory. Sustainable family business theory was developed, and it's been empirically tested by the members of the Family Business Research Group from the MC 1030 project. So I see that Diane and George are on their part of the group as well. It's evolved over time, and we have acquired a better understanding of the factors that influence the long-term sustainability of family businesses through the work of our project. So the slide that you see now, I'm the lucky one who gets to talk about this one. The slide lays out the conceptualization of the theory to date. And initially the diagram was much simpler, and it focused on the interface between the family and the business with an emphasis on resources and demands and how they influence business success. It also recognized that family and business systems frequently interact or interface with each other and contribute to the vitality and sustainability of each other. So now you'll see, that the model still recognizes the importance of resources to family-owned businesses, and we've gained a better understanding of those resource contributions in the form of social and human capital and assets. Initially, we recognized demands, and we can now elaborate on the various forms of constraints, such as sociocultural, legal, economic, and technical constraints. We also have a better understanding of the processes that contribute to short-term business vitality and long-term sustainability of the family business. And through the study we're discussing today and others, we're acquiring a better understanding of how family business and business systems owned by family businesses and contribute to their community and to the sustainability of each other. Of particular interest today, a major premise of the theory is that the sustainability of a family business is a function of both business success and family functionality, particularly during times of disruption. Because when a disruption occurs, whether it's inside the family or the business, for example, if the business owner became seriously ill, or it's from outside the family or the family business system, for example, as in the case of an economic recession, which we're discussing today, a reevaluation of resources of the family business must take place. The theory recognizes that different processes occur in these systems over times of stability or times of change. And a unique feature of the theory is the ability to examine how family and business systems respond to disruptions in regular patterns by reallocating resources across systems. The ways in which family businesses use available resources during times of stability can exert either a positive or a negative influence on the system's adaptive capacity during times of disruption, and I'll provide some examples of that as we discuss the results of the present study later on. Over time, the successful use of these strategies to deal with disruption will contribute to the adaptive capacity or the resilience of the family-owned business and contributes to work-life balance and sustainability of both the family business over time. Next, Linda will talk about the other theoretical framework that informs the study.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. The next framework that we are utilizing for the study is Morris's framework of entrepreneurial capabilities and processes. This provides us kind of a language for describing what strategies and practices the business owners used that were actually entrepreneurial. That's kind of a big vague question sometimes, and we use the term entrepreneurial loosely. So Morris has a series of capabilities and processes that he has identified in his research that will aid in identifying and categorizing entrepreneurial responses to those types of disruptions that Margaret just mentioned. Okay, as we look at the next slide, you'll see that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial capabilities, it's not just one big thing all mixed up in one pot, but there are actual identifiable capabilities and skills, if you will, that we look at in terms of analyzing the strategies that are used. So when we say, what is an entrepreneurial response? We can say, well, it may involve some form of creative problem solving, or that they were actively seeking new opportunities to expand their business instead of just saying they were trying to do more or trying to do better. That's obviously very vague. So we felt that Morris's set of capabilities really would allow for articulation of what these family businesses were doing that was in fact innovative, growth-oriented, proactive, not just something that was run-of-the-mill. Okay, next I will turn it over to Glenn to look at our methods.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon to everybody, depending upon where you're at in the country. And I'm going to just briefly touch on some of the methods and discuss what we did in this one. As has been pointed out, this is actually the fourth wave of a panel that began in 1997. And so we have, in a way, the luxury of being able to track these businesses starting back from 1997, and so we have data, some of it continuously. We've used the same questions over all four waves to gather data, where in 1997 we just sort of found out who are these businesses. It was a random sample of businesses across the country. Some of you already know this, some of you may be new to this. We were able to go back in 2000. Then in 2007, we started to look at how are disasters influencing these family-owned businesses. What happened? And let's look at disasters issues. Well, then along came 2016, 2015, and our group had the chance. We had some supportive funding from various sources, including the North Central office there, to now not only look at those what were sort of a lot of weather disasters and large immediate disasters, but what happens in the time of a disaster that is more slow building, such as the recession? And I guess I was one of the ones that was really curious about how are these businesses, how they respond, and what did they do to the recession? And so we went back a fourth time and utilized, as it says, a mixed methods, meaning we used, previously we'd always used, it was always a caddy telephone interviews, short questionnaire, short questions to answer, but because we knew we were going to have even some additional tail off, we just were losing businesses. We had the resources to spend a little bit of time to also ask some probing questions with no anticipated response. We just let them talk, and then we could analyze those after we got the information back. So we could look deeper as to when Margaret mentioned businesses who left us, both Margaret and Linda, we could find them, we knew where they were, and now we could ask them, well, why did you close? And you can't get, we could get some simple snippets, but here we were able to dig a little bit deeper, and so we had these open-ended interview questions in the process. It was developed, the survey instrument was developed by us. Some of the questions are continuous from back in 1997, and some of them were specific, looking at what are the recessionary business behaviors that you undertook. We didn't have a lot of time to ask a lot of questions, but we put together some questions, did some lit review, looking at what may be the most productive information that we could find out. And so we continued with the same sample of business owners that started back in 1996. There were 200 yet that we could still find of business owners and managers, and to those 200, we asked them to participate, and as you can see, our final sample consisted of 71 surviving and 41 closed businesses. We could still locate the business owner or somebody who knew something about the business, but now they could tell us what happened and why did the business close. And so we're going to now move on to some of the results from this look, and Margaret's going to take that on.
The first research question focused on the demographic characteristics of small family-owned businesses who survived the recession of 2007 to 2009. And as you'll see, of the surviving businesses, almost 3/4 of them were male-owned. The owners had relatively high levels of education, over half had a bachelor's degree, and the majority were very small with 3 or fewer employees or were sole proprietorships. These findings are obviously consistent with the findings from our earlier panels as well as with other studies on family-owned businesses, and we'll again talk about the implications later on in the webinar. This next slide shows the characteristics of non-surviving businesses. Obviously, they were largely women-owned businesses, those with younger owners and those with less education on average. And these findings are also consistent with those of earlier studies. In looking at these in non-survivors, and I'm particularly interested in the managerial adjustment strategies that they use to cope with demands either in the family or the business or when things are really hectic. We've learned some things from our research on minority-owned businesses that can help us explain, for example, the findings on women. Yun Lee and I and some other researchers found that there were different adjustment strategies used more frequently by female minority-owned business owners, and compared to their male counterparts during demanding times, they were more likely to reallocate family resources to support the business. They intertwine family and business tasks more, and they use more volunteer help. And as informed by sustainable family business theory that I talked about earlier, the ways in which family businesses use these available resources during times of stability can give either a positive or negative influence, as I said, it's possible, for example, that in these women-owned businesses, they might start taking too much away from their families or their social networks to support their business during difficult times. And that can be in the form of time or money or other resources. And it can get to the point where the strategies that were not sustainable or not functionable are not functionable to one system or the other. For example, in our minority-owned businesses, the women may rely on volunteer help more frequently during demanding times, and we often see that those volunteers are family members. But during a recession, these volunteers may have to go work in the paid labor force to support their own families or their own interests, and so the pool of volunteers dries up, and the strategy is no longer effective. So So we're trying to draw from some of this previous work that we've done to explain what's happening with these rural entrepreneurs. It may also be that the unique characteristics of rural entrepreneurship that Linda mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar make it more difficult for vulnerable owners to be sustainable during a recession. For example, maybe they can't get the educated workforce that they need, or they don't have adequate social services or healthcare systems in their community. They have less wealth to tap into during tough times, and so on. So those are some of our preliminary thoughts on what we're seeing. The next slide gives us the reasons for business closure. Just under a quarter of the people closed for financial reasons or because of financial challenges. Almost half of them retired, and about a quarter, just under a quarter, had health issues. So as stated on the slide, although we often think of business finances and success key influences on the decision to close, family needs and circumstances are also really important. But what we don't know from our findings is whether or not, for example, they left because they had challenges from the recession that expedited their exit. For example, with the financial challenges are very likely related to the recession. But as far as retirement, it may be easier to go ahead and retire if you can afford it if the business is struggling through the recession. I mean, does the owner say, okay, it's time to close up shop, I'm not going to do this anymore? Or if the owner is ill, does he or she say, you know, I just don't have the energy to take care of myself and to help the business survive through this recession, it's time to hang it up. You know, unfortunately, we have not been able to tease out any of those results. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Glenn to talk about some additional results.
Thanks, Margaret. Research question number 3 was looking at the rural business performance, in particular in the recession there. We saw, as we were looking at the data, as we started to do some examination and stuff, that yes, there was, as we probably suspected, that if you're having a perception of difficulties with the recession, that's probably leading into cash flows, and of course the crosstab analysis did bring that out as there, you know, and we've noticed this from going way back to the first time, is that business owners, whether you ask them their subjective sense of what's going on in the business is often headed in the same direction as what the objective ones, although if anything they tend to feel they're usually doing better than what the data may actually indicate to us, but that's part of human nature. You try to put on a good spin on what's going on and stuff, but there was a connection between this perceived difficulty with the recession and cash flow problems, and that continued. Those that continued in business, if they were having cash flow problems during the recession, they were probably, or performance difficulties, they're probably going to continue to see that at post-recession, at least for the time period that we were able to gather data from them. You know, cash is, for these family business owners, from our work here and from my work over the years, cash flow is a huge issue to small businesses. They don't have the luxury of having large amounts of capital to tap into, and that's has been indicated. They will tap into the family's cash. They will do all sorts of things to try to stabilize and to keep things going. But yet there's this continuing lingering effect, it seems to be, that if you have, cash flow issues, performance difficulties, it just takes a long time to build out of that and stuff. And some of it's from the passion that we think, we don't have any data here, this is me speaking now, some of it's from the passion that they want this business and they want it bad. And they're willing to put up with some of these struggles and to try to get it to go and stuff. Rural businesses seem to have less of an impact by the recession. Some reported actually steady customer demand, and some indicated that the recession actually not only, this is this next one, strong market. Ag is included in our business owners, and through the recessionary period, they had some good times. And I look at the state of North Dakota. The recession was our lead-in to what everybody, called the Bakken boom out here. That was the buildup, and so we had a strong ag market, and we were in the early part of building on the oil market, and so yeah, it was good. There's also was decreased number of competitors. Some of those who went by the wayside, it was just a weeding out, and that happens and stuff. I look at Margaret's husband, and she didn't know I'm going to bring him up, but when we were sort of having this discussion as we were talking about this project, he's a civil engineer. And he said, well, in good times, towns have money to spend. But in bad times, there's usually some economic incentive programs going on. So towns have money to spend for the type of services. So they saw relatively steady customer demand in their engineering firm, or if not strong. There was lots of incentive during those times to build infrastructure capacity and building it and stuff. So it continued to go on. So the rural areas seem to have a little bit less of a impact by this whole thing than what we found in some of the urban areas. The majority of the surviving rural family businesses, though, when we're talking about them, were very small. Rural tends to have a smaller family or business size, and often they were sole proprietors. As you see, 52% of them, or less than 3 employees, 38% of them are sole proprietors. And but as it's been indicated, we were dominated by micro businesses, but there is some ability to transfer resources at times. People can step in, step out. Dollars can move in and move out in this process. And so it adds something to our understanding. It also leaves us with more questions as we think about it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Our next research question segued into looking at the actual strategies and practices that were used by these small family-owned rural businesses. And we looked at differences in the businesses' behavior, really their strategies and practices, both during the recession and then since the recession. we found that most of the businesses, and I should also note that we looked at the businesses then in another grouping pattern. We looked at those that reported having performance difficulties and challenges, and those that reported having no performance difficulties. As Glenn just alluded to, some of them said, no, recession really didn't have that great of an impact on us. So we looked at those two groups, and most of the businesses with the performance difficulties during the recession reported changing at least one business practice during that time period, some more. We'll look at some of what those specific practices were in just a moment. About half of the businesses reporting difficulties have made no strategy or practice change, however, since the recession, which I think is really eye-opening, and certainly provides some food for thought and also some much needed direction for outreach and assistance. Okay, as we look at the types of strategies and practices that were reported by these family businesses over time, what were some of those that were most often made during the recession? And I think this is super interesting when we look at the left panel of this particular slide, that relying upon relatives, certainly there's looking at changes in employees and numbers of employees, but a lot of things related to families being involved come up in those early changes that they made. So hearkening back to Margaret's discussion of the sustainable family business theory, I think we can see that families interacting with and the interdependence of family-owned businesses, families and businesses on each other certainly comes to bear in those particular findings. Since the recession, though, we see not such a cut and adjust employees approach or have family members step in to pick up the slack approach. We really saw more innovation and more some of Morris's strategies that we looked at in our other strategic framework. Such as resource leveraging, trying to maximize their output, more creative decision making, trying to be more efficient, better use of resources, trying to reduce their risk, really looking at how can I get a bigger bang for my buck, how much space do I really need, how can I have my staff get more maximum output from the people and the other resources that I'm using in my business in order to sustain and to perform well and to grow. So we did see more of those types of strategies used post-recession. In our next two research questions, we looked at digital strategies. And as I had mentioned earlier, these were just very sparsely looked at in earlier studies, and that's partially the evolution of the whole digital age. That was very early when the last data collection was conducted. So in research question 5, we were looking at the association of the use of digital strategies with business revenue. So we found that higher business revenue was associated with a few strategies that were mentioned in this study. So if they had a dedicated staff that was actually managing their website and their social media on a more full-time basis, there was someone that really that was their targeted role within the business, that had a positive association with higher business revenue. Focusing on a single or a limited set of online options. I know I have really great discussions with Glenn on, what is that right package of social media that small businesses should have. So rather than trying to do it all and be sucked into the whirlwind of social media, those that stuck to a limited set of online options really resulted in higher business revenue. And then also outsourcing or having a contract for online functions. Sometimes outsourcing does make sense, and you can have more consistent delivery by outsourcing some of those functions. So those were some of our findings for research question 5. In research question 6, we looked at the most frequently used strategies, online and digital strategies by these small family-owned rural businesses. And obviously websites we would expect to be the most used. But social media is not too far behind. We have a kind of large array of different kinds of social media that we found them using. Facebook leading the pack, but there are a lot of different other platforms that were used as well. Selling products online, and then tracking online customer and market information, a smaller number, but yet, you know, it's starting to get some traction there. So those were our findings from RQ 5 and 6 that looked at online and digital strategies, and there's all kinds of additional research and further analyses from this data that we would like to do concerning those newer types of strategies used by these family-owned businesses. Okay, I will next turn it over to Margaret.
So the results of this study have gotten us thinking about a lot of things. One of the things we haven't looked at yet are community networks or social capital, and we think that would be interesting to explore. For example, do communities rally around these family businesses during difficult times? And if so, how do they do that, or what do they do? And you're getting to know my family well. Glenn talked about my husband. Now I'm going to talk about my mother-in-law. I remember when my mother-in-law and her friends, who lived in a small, isolated, rural town in North Dakota, decided that they would buy all of their gas and their milk and other necessities at the locally owned convenience store, which was also family business, because it was one of the few remaining businesses in their town, and it was the only gas station and the only convenience store, and they didn't want to lose it. You know, they were older widows, they were driving less, shopping less, and they felt that they needed that business in their community in order to be able to stay in that town and be relatively independent. So they vowed to support it, and they encouraged other people to do it because they didn't want to lose that service. And I think that's a very interesting phenomena that would be good to explore further. On this slide, we just listed a few of our research ideas for the future. You know, are full-time business owners more innovative and entrepreneurial than part-time owners? Are they more focused or more thoughtful in their ways? Or could it be that part-time owners pick up outside inspiration, which helps them to thrive or be more creative? Are they more fluid in moving in and out of the labor force during economic cycles so they can help sustain both the business and the family? What can we learn about gender differences or similarities, and how might that inform educators who work with rural entrepreneurs? We know that women-owned businesses might be struggling more. What kind of outreach and education do we need for them? What managerial adjustment strategies are used by rural business owners that either foster or hinder survival? And how does an owner know that a strategy that used to work is becoming ineffective and shift gears? We've identified some adjustment strategies through our work over the years on the project, but there are probably many more strategies to identify and explore. And now Glenn is going to give us a snapshot of some rural family businesses and tell some more stories.
As Margaret said, it's been interesting to work and to do this research, but I've also had the luxury over my career to also be out working with businesses and to take a look at how they're doing some of the things that we suspected they would be doing, that we thought our results were showing and stuff. And so I'm just going to outline 4 different businesses. These are all North Dakota businesses. I don't apologize for that. We're just going to highlight 4 North Dakota businesses. But look at some of the unique things that they've been able to do, taking some of the things we might suggest or some of the things that we saw these businesses happening over the course of their lives that we've been able to follow anyway. And the literature might suggest some of these things and talk about what have they done, how are they doing this and stuff. It's a sort of expansion of ideas and to show that it can be done. And the first one is actually one that my wife found. It's called So Batik, and for those of you who are in the fabric world, you know what batik fabric is and stuff. This is a business that started actually during the recessionary period in Mayville, North Dakota. And Mayville's not a big town. Well, it depends upon how you define big. To some of us in North Dakota, we'd say, wow, it's a big town. But it's a relatively small town. There's thousands of success stories like this. But they have grabbed onto one, they network very well, and they go out networking and selling their fabric through conferences and conventions of usually quilters. They were able to find this niche, find this fabric that everybody likes. They have it. They come up with the designs and have it custom made, and then brought back into the country and stuff. But then they went online. And the online world, and I don't know a lot about this company yet. It's on my to-do list. And as Chris has indicated, the ma and pa businesses, well, this is a husband-wife. And Margaret and I research copreneurs. And this is a copreneur couple that decided to put this together and are doing very well from all indications and the little bit I've known, and was up to their store when we, that was my wife's birthday present. We took a day trip and went up there, and she got to shop at that store and stuff. So her boutique pile was growing too small there. But that's one of the strategies. It's a strategy. And Roberto Gallardo from the Southern Rural Development Center has done, or not from the, works down in the South, and with the SRDC has talked a lot about rural needs to capitalize on online. And we need to make sure we have fast online. We need to take, it was always, online was always, and I'm old enough to remember that online was going to be the salvation of the rural areas. Well, yeah, but other places are doing it too, and largely it was in the larger cities that these big companies grew up and stuff. But it is a possibility that, and this is just one example. Pride Dairy. Another company that went through the recessionary period. They're actually a very old company in the sense I think they've been around since, I want to put them back into the 30s. But then they were struggling, and new ownership came along. They went through the recession, and they produce ice cream. They're the only remaining ice cream producer, small dairy that we have remaining in the state, or it's not a dairy they buy. But again, it's been networking and connections and pride of what they do. I mean, pride is more than just the name. It is pride in their product and stuff, to the level that I never remember when I did a video interview with them here a ways back. They talked about a 90-year-old woman living in California, and that's all she wanted for her birthday was some Pride ice cream. She had grown up in that area and had grown up with that ice cream, and they were figuring out a way to get it to her with dry ice and everything. And when you're in a small area, they didn't have dry ice up there. And so first was, how do you get the ice? How do you, can you ship it fast enough when you don't have overnight deliveries from, FedEx or anybody exactly from their town? So it was kind of cool to go through that discussion. They now produce an ice cream for our North Dakota state parks, and recently were approached by the Mount Rushmore National Park could they reproduce Thomas Jefferson's ice cream recipe, which they had, which of course the ingredients today have changed some, but could they reproduce that and build it in mass or enough to supply. So if you go down to Mount Rushmore, you can get Thomas Jefferson's vanilla ice cream as best as they could. And that was networking, that was connections, and that was pride in what they're doing and being able to work with that end consumer and the middle consumer was, could you get them what they wanted and stuff. So there's a whole new story there. I have to go back and hear more about that one. A couple other businesses, Riverbound Farm. Riverbound Farm is now a CSA, but they're also getting into producing for some of our local food outlets and some of our restaurants. They've been one that has capitalized on trends. They saw this local food growing, and they've blended it with family. Their family, this is a young couple again. I say young, but they would probably say we're not so young anymore. But they capitalize on working on these trends, and now they're looking at, do they make another shift? Local foods are big, but they're looking at the profitability side and wondering, is CSA the route to go, or are there other ways, such as putting it in stores and stuff, that they could focus more and maybe lighten their workload a little bit. And lastly, there's Firehouse Ribs. Again, they built on a niche and an opportunity. They built during the recession. The reason the woman who owns this business and her husband, she primarily runs it, came to town was they were looking for a low-cost resource, meat processing facility. And one sat in this little town of Medina, North Dakota. And so they went in there. But this is where community comes into play. We talk about the community. Margaret had that great story of the community supporting a business. They moved into a community that already had a butcher shop. And they knew in a small town, Medina is very small, probably a couple hundred people, that 2 butcher shops are probably not going to make it. And so they went in and had an initial discussion and said, here's the deal. We're going to do Firehouse Ribs, but we're not going to sell local. They specifically, and they told that to their customers, they told to the community, they told that to the other butcher shop in town, they were not going to compete. Their market was going to be elsewhere, and they are now elsewhere. They're in about 7 states surrounding us, in a few locations in all those states. And so that's this idea of it's a two-way street. And Linda has worked a lot on this, looking at community and business and this interchange between the two and support from one to the other. And so they really are a living example of that. And and we also have, another example I didn't put up here, but Margaret touched on it, our grocery stores. We see that a lot here in North Dakota. There just was an article this morning about New England country stores are going dark. It's this whole same story. These businesses, and so we've followed these businesses, and I guess now as we're coming closer to the summary of all this, we have followed these businesses. We see these acts and these strategies being played out, and we're just finding ourselves more questions that we want to ask and stuff. And so it's important that these rural communities look at success and also sustainability over the long period of time, that they dig into this and how they respond and can respond, and the resources that they have. It's been, some great work and stuff. And with that, I'm going to give it over to, I believe it's Linda. I lost my notes here, to take it and discuss it further.
Yeah, actually, it's Margaret. We'll do the next, but that's fine, Glenn.
Thanks for those great stories, Glenn. We can learn so much from case studies. So in conclusion, this study extends the understanding of how rural family-owned businesses respond to economic change from the perspective of both the business and the family. And the findings of the study are particularly important to rural communities that depend on the success and sustainability of family businesses for access to goods and services, for employment, and as drivers of the local economy. Identifying the types of strategies and practice that enable family-owned businesses to succeed and sustain through the recessionary period provides important implications for business owners, business consultants, and policymakers. So here are some more of our ideas on the scale of being able to balance and exchange resources across the system. You know, can we design educational efforts, for example, delivered through extension, to help owners become more adaptable and to implement successful strategies to weather economic cycles? You know, how do we create community environments that support the more vulnerable entrepreneurs and help them thrive? You know, what can we do for those younger owners, those women-owned businesses, and those businesses where the owners have less education? You know, how do we reach less educated business owners in ways that are supportive and encouraging of additional learning and comfortable for them to participate in? And what local or state regulations support or hinder rural entrepreneurship? You know, how do we engage different stakeholder groups to support local businesses? Obviously, there's much more work to do, and Linda's going to close with our acknowledgement and our reference.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Just to kind of wrap up, I think we've had some really interesting findings that have bubbled up from this research, and as Margaret said, we have lots remaining to be done. We are in the process of developing a methods paper, which will kind of give an overview of this particular project. And then we're working on a number of other papers and reports this year. I see that Bridget asked if we had any written reports or articles we can access. Those will be forthcoming. Our contact information is provided here, so you're welcome to contact us at any time. But we will also work with NCRCRD. Once we get some reports that are finalized, we'll certainly make those available to those of you who participated today. I wanted to especially thank NCRCRD for funding this project, and also would like to recognize the NC 1030 Family Business Research Group, various individuals for their input, particularly the co-PIs on this project, Margaret and Glenn, and to Anu, who helped with the data analysis. I just think there's so much food for thought here. You know, Glenn, as I was listening to your stories, you know, like with Sobatique, I mean, I could take Michael Morris's entrepreneurial framework and really start plugging it in there in terms of innovation and new products, services, the customer experience. You know, can we help small rural businesses like Sobatique? They really are multi-channel, verging on what I would call omni-channel. They have all of these different channels that are working in sync with each other. I heard authenticity with Pride Dairy. You know, the trends of like buy local with Riverbound Farms. So, you know, the whole community and business support piece. So there are a lot of additional areas for us to look at within this data set, and also ongoing research. This now is kind of like a preliminary set of data for us going forward in NC 1030. So we look forward to sharing our findings with you as they come about, and we thank you for your participation today.
Well, thanks a lot, Linda, Margaret, and Glenn, for this talk. I have shifted the evaluation over there, and a few of you have clicked through that. That's great. It'd be great to get some more responses on that as well. I did have a couple questions as I was listening. You know, have you, I mean, it's a limited number of observations, obviously, but I wondered if you tried to tease out, particularly with your interest in social capital, the first Americans and the new Americans, are they, you know, they probably have different family and community structures, and so their use of social capital for business survival might be different, and I was wondering if you'd looked at that at all.
We have not looked at that yet, but we have the capabilities to do that with the demographic information that's available in this data set. So I think that's a really great additional piece to add to our future research, Scott. So thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, especially Glenn, since you're from a state that has significant tribal communities, how might you expect the data to be different from the European Americans?
What I know of in my work with tribal entities, they potentially have although we have family support, their idea of family is much deeper and broader, and they do get in the businesses that I've worked with much deeper support, and there's also, in a larger sense, more probably community support, although there are some issues sometimes between the interplay between various families in a community and stuff. So it would cut both ways, I think. Some of Scott, to our data that we have, we've never had a large sampling of businesses. Most of our businesses are white, the European background and stuff.
Yeah, so that might be future work where you would try to expand the sample to some of these different groups. Do like continue the European American sample, but maybe expand it to some of these other groups with kind of an oversample or purposive sample, just to see what the differences or similarities might be. Could be.
There isn't the data. They don't have much of a panel, but Baruch University, who one of our colleagues on this project went to work for them, and Baruch did sampling. They're out of New York, and they did sampling of Hispanic and Korean and African American, and specifically those three entities, and compared them. They also did a white sample all at the same time. Now this is, it's old data because it was all Margaret back in, I want to say 98, 99 was that data pulled or something. So, it's dated, but we do have some comparison data that's older that we could begin to look at and then move it forward.
But I would imagine Baruch would be more, the sample would have been more urban.
Yes, yeah, probably yes, as it was, and but the good thing is they used, to a large extent, our questionnaire, so it matches across a lot of the questions.
Speaking of questions, folks have some. The chat box is open, so feel free to ask anything else. So I guess another question that I had when I was thinking about your talk is, and Glenn's examples helped a little bit. Are these primarily not Main Street, or is it a mix? And what's the breakdown between Main Street businesses and non-Main Street businesses?
It is a mix, Scott. I don't have the percent right here at my fingertips, but a number of these businesses are, they're, as we noted, they're sole entrepreneur businesses, and I don't have the percent if it's like, 30, 70 or whatever that breakdown might be. We can certainly provide that in our forthcoming report, but they're all from communities that are rural, less than 50,000 population. Most of them are from quite small communities. So, it's truly a mix. As Glenn said, you could have a caterer, you could have a fabric business, you could have a restaurant, you could have a repair business. They're as you know, in rural communities, there's really going to be this cross-section of different types of businesses. So I think that's reflective in our data.
Yeah, this seems like it might be good to break it out by that classification to see if there are differences across the two classifications.
Yep.
Let's see, and Margaret added a comment about another resource in terms of minority business owner data. So thank you for that, Margaret. Well, I'm not seeing a lot of other questions, and it looks like folks have finished doing their evaluation. So I want to thank everyone for being on today, and also our presenters for a really informative and useful talk.